In this video, I'm going to ask you, how much should you invest into your hobby? So recently, I got to actually play a tabletop game in person with another human being, and that human being was, of course, our friend Sam Lenz. You've seen him here on the channel. You've seen him on his own channel, Pachow, or at least you should. And we got together actually here in the studio and got to play, admittedly, one game, because I had to stream later on in the night, but we got together and we played a game of Warcry, and we'll be doing it again some more in the future. And as happens when you sit down and play a tabletop game, very frequently, tabletop face-to-face conversation turns into something that, at least for me, sometimes it turns into a video. So he played Untamed Beasts, and I played the 13, my 13 Skaven plague monks with the big sticks for hitting and all that stuff. And we had a good time, and it was a short game, which was cool, and I lost, which was it was fine. But after it was done, the conversation that we've been having, talking about a lot of different things, sort of turned to how I didn't feel that bad losing. I mean, it had been my first time playing in quite some time, so there was that. But also, and Sam brought this up, when you play a game that doesn't take a lot of time, you don't feel so bad at the end if you lose because you didn't invest as much time into it. And that word, invest, kind of sparked a lot of things going on in my brain. We talked a little bit more about the way that we are currently prepared to invest, predominantly time and effort and whatnot, into our gaming, and how it is kind of steering the games that we enjoy playing. Both of us are pretty keen on Warcry right now. We're going to be playing a campaign. We might run through a short campaign just ourselves, and then maybe we'll do one here on the channel. And also, we've got some other friends who are playing. We might try to do another campaign with them, not on the channel, just for us. But we like the fact that it's small little bits that kind of string out into one longer campaign, one longer story, one longer kind of deal, as opposed to sit down and play for 3 hours, and at the end of it you lost, and then you feel almost kind of like, you should be a gracious loser, certainly, but sometimes after 3 hours of just like, I've not been ahead at any point during this entire thing, and now, hooray, I have finally lost, you feel a little salty sometimes, even the best of us, me. I'm not saying I'm the best of us, but I certainly do sometimes feel salty after 3 hours and then a loss. And because of that, I like to stick with skirmish games more these days, and so generally does Sam. And I think that investment in time into the actual length of the game is a definite kind of thing that you have to think about. When we're talking about investment, a lot of people think money, but it's also time, it's effort, it's also a thought process, and I'm going to try to get on all of those. But with the actual time and effort, not just the time and effort to play, but also the time and effort to build a big army and to paint a big army and all of that kind of stuff, it comes to a cost-benefit analysis, as many things in business seem to do. Not that, and this is kind of a bit. Anyway, my point is, you have to make the decision at which point the cost outweighs the benefit. That's the analysis that one needs to make. So you have to say, I don't mind spending 3 hours of my time if I get to play a big, huge spectacle of a game with lots and lots and lots of miniatures and terrain and all kinds of stuff like that. And that's okay. Even if I lose, I am willing to invest that time into that game. I am willing to invest the amount of time and effort that goes into building a force that large, 2,000 points, 2,500 points, depends on the game, whatever. But that's the issue. If you're saying to yourself, I don't want to spend that much amount of time, well, then you have to kind of adjust your expectations and say, maybe skirmish games are for me. So at that point, you making that decision, do I need a giant spectacle of a game, or do I need to spend less time on it but still have a fun, kind of interesting, maybe story-fueled sort of smaller game? That's a decision that each of us as hobbyists in this particular hobby need to make. Then, of course, if we're going to be talking about investment, obviously money comes into play, not just time and effort, but actual, cashola. And the question becomes, again, cost-benefit analysis. Is it important to you to have that giant spectacle? And if so, then that you're going to have to probably have a lot of miniatures. But if the spectacle is the most important thing, then the question becomes, but is it the particular manufacturer that's also the most important thing? You can play big mass battle games for not that much amount of money. If you get into, say, historicals, 15 millimeter scale, you can have humongous mass battles for not that much money. Now, if it's got to be a huge apocalypse level Warhammer 40K army that has to come from Games Workshop, get ready for some investment, and not the kind that you're going to get a ton of like return on. I mean, you'll get the enjoyment, and you might even get to sell it down the road if you decide to do that. But I don't know that you're going to make money. It's not necessarily an endeavor that has a positive cash flow situation. You have to kind of think about it that way and understand that when you're thinking about investment. I did a video a long time ago about not going into debt because of your hobby. Pachow. And it's a thing you don't want to do. So if you're thinking to yourself, the biggest benefit for me is playing a humongous battle army, then you need to start thinking about maybe the type of game that you need to play, the type of manufacturer that's going to make those models, and then where that kind of lies. But on the other hand, if you're like, I want to have really amazing, top quality looking models, but I only need a couple of them, well, then you could probably get away with using stuff from the real fancy people out there in the industry, or taking bits from a bunch of different places and kit bashing them. I sometimes, when I kit bash, am using a Games Workshop body and a Games Workshop gun, but then a head that I had to buy from someplace like in Poland or whatever. There's a lot of different resin manufacturers who make bits over there and all that kind of stuff. And then the miniature can actually cost more than if you would have just bought a regular retail miniature. So, those things, but when you're only building 3 of them, 4 of them, it's not so bad. So keep those things in mind as well, but don't go into debt. Watch that other video. One of the other things you really kind of have to think about as well is not just investing time, effort, and investing money, but also investing thought or headspace. Now, what does this mean exactly? Board gamers generally don't necessarily watch a lot of lore videos about the board game they love. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm going to try to explain it. So if you're into board gaming, you open up a board game, you sit down with your friends, you play a game, it's great, you put it back in the box, you set it on the shelf, and you don't necessarily think about it. You might remember it and go, oh, that was a great game or whatever, or think, oh, there might be cool ways to tweak this or whatever. But you're not going to watch 45-minute lore videos about a game like Wingspan or, Settlers of Catan necessarily, whereas a game like 40K has thousands and thousands of videos out there from different people all over YouTube who are talking about just the storyline, just the things going on in the game that are showing up in the books, that are showing up in the novels and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot going on there. So, there's a lot that people can think about, and you can be thinking about the game all the time, whereas with a board game, you put it away and you're not thinking about it as much anymore. Role-playing games also go into that. I'm investing a lot of headspace and thought into the story and the ideas, and that's kind of the way that works. So when you're kind of, thinking about how much do I want to invest into my hobby, sometimes it's nice to think about a game. I like to play small skirmish games from a couple different companies because then I don't have to sit down and think about. I like to put thought into the models and what I'm putting together, what kind of warband I'm putting together. But there doesn't need to be necessarily, video after video after video of storyline. But if you're into that, if that's what you want, then definitely take a look at some of the bigger games that have a lot more story and novels and magazines and books and things like that for you to really focus on. When you decide that you're going to invest into a hobby, you really have to kind of break it down into 3 main areas. There's basically time and effort, which I'll kind of put together into one thing, and that's both in the building and the painting, but also in how much time it actually takes to play. There's also the money. That's also super important, obviously. And then, of course, there's also kind of the headspace, the thought, like how much time do I think about the hobby when I'm not even doing it, that kind of stuff. And again, all of these things depend upon what you are trying to get out of your hobby, but understand the whole idea of the cost-benefit analysis. And when I'm saying cost, I don't necessarily mean money. I'm talking about the cost of all of these 3 different things. You have to kind of determine what's going to work for you within your overall life. You've got a job, you've got a family, you've got things that you like to do, probably some other hobbies as well. Understanding that if you're like, I need to play an incredibly deep, very long game with hundreds and hundreds of models, but you don't have that kind of time, then you're not going to be getting to the point where you're actually going to be able to sit down and enjoy them probably for quite some time when you have to carve out a little bit of time here and there to be able to do it. So then again, the investment of time and potentially money and potentially just overall kind of headspace and all the things that you need to keep kind of juggled in the air becomes something to really consider. So when it's time for you to decide, maybe this game's not for me, or maybe this game is, take those things into consideration and understand that getting down and playing in this hobby can be an investment, but it all depends on what you're trying to get out of it.